Chapter 1. The Wedding Dress and the Converse Shoes. Zoe Campbell never thought she'd be the kind of girl who'd run away from her own wedding. But here she was, sprinting across a soaked Vermont meadow, her pristine white wedding gown caked in mud, veil flapping behind her like a broken kite. The red Converse sneakers she'd secretly slipped on beneath her dress before walking down the aisle slammed into the ground, leaving chaotic footprints on the muddy trail. "Just run, Zoe," she told herself, breath ragged. "Run and don't look back." The quaint little chapel in the town of Maplewood was far behind her now. Along with the fiancé she didn't love, the icy glare of her stepmother and 100 guests left gaping when she'd shouted, "I won't marry him," and bolted out the door. She could picture it perfectly, her stepmother, Evelyn, screaming into the phone, either calling a search party or worse, the press. A cold wind swept through, making Zoe shiver. She stopped, hands on her knees, trying to breathe. The pine forest ahead looked like a green labyrinth, but she had no choice. The church bells still echoed faintly behind her, a reminder they'd soon be looking. "All right, Zoe Campbell," she muttered. "You're a wedding planner, not a professional runaway, but you've got this." She had barely taken a step when the skies opened up. Not a soft cinematic drizzle. No, a full-blown downpour, as if the universe wanted to punish her. Her soaked wedding gown clung to her body, heavy as a sack of potatoes. Zoe tilted her face to the sky and yelled, "Seriously? Now?" Right then, her foot slipped in a puddle of mud, and she crashed forward. She flailed, trying to grab onto something, and slammed into something solid, warm, and smelling faintly of pine and coffee. "Someone trying to off themselves in a wedding dress?" A low, slightly gruff voice said above her. Zoe blinked through the rain. Standing in front of her was a tall man in a gray wool coat, messy brown hair under a baseball cap. A shaggy dog, maybe a lab, stood beside him, eyeing her like she was the strangest creature on earth. "Not suicide," Zoe gasped, trying to stand, but the wedding dress dragged her down. "Just escaping. A little bit." The man raised an eyebrow, clearly not buying it. "Escaping? In that outfit? You headed to a forest prom or something?" Zoe scowled and yanked the veil off her head. "Glad you find this amusing. Now help me up or let me die in this mud puddle." He sighed and extended a hand. His grip was strong, calloused, not an office guy. Zoe grabbed it and stumbled upright, her dress making a loud squelch like a beached fish. "Thanks," she muttered, pushing wet hair off her face. "I'm fine." "Fine?" He eyed her from head to toe. Muddy red Converse, torn wedding gown. "You look like you escaped from a horror movie." Zoe crossed her arms, trying to salvage a shred of dignity. "I'm a bride, okay. A slightly lost one. Who are you, a park ranger or something?" He gave a short laugh, not exactly friendly. "Miles, just a guy walking his dog. And you, runaway bride, what's your name?" "Zoe," she said, hesitating. She wasn't planning to give away more, not when the whole town might be out looking for her. Miles stared at her for a moment, like he was debating whether to pretend he'd never seen her. Then he sighed again, the kind of sigh that said he was about to do something he didn't want to. "Come on," he said, turning to walk. The shaggy dog trotted after him, glancing back at Zoe as if inviting her along. "Go where?" Zoe called out, trying to follow without falling again. "My place," Miles replied without looking back. "Unless you'd prefer to spend the night in the woods, in a wedding dress." Zoe hesitated. Following a stranger into the forest? Probably the worst idea ever. But the rain kept falling. She was freezing, and those church bells seemed to be getting closer. She bit her lip, then ran after him, red Converse flashing in the rain. "You're watching Soul Stories, where every tale whispers of love, healing, and hope. If you believe that even the smallest act of kindness can change a life, and that love often arrives when we least expect it, don't forget to subscribe and be part of our journey. Now stay with us. The story is just beginning." Chapter 2. The Runaway Bride and the Grumpy Man. Zoe Campbell trudged behind Miles along the muddy trail, her soaked wedding dress clinging to her legs like a constant reminder of her insane decision. The rain had eased, but the cold winds still slipped through the torn veil, making her shiver uncontrollably. The shaggy dog, whom Miles called Rusty, occasionally turned back, tongue lolling as if to ask, "You still keeping up?" "How far is your cabin?" Zoe shouted, trying to be louder than the wind. "Because I swear I'm about to freeze into a lawn ornament." Miles didn't look back, just jerked his head forward. "5 more minutes, longer if you fall again." Zoe glared at his back, knowing he couldn't see it. "Such a gentleman, truly refreshing." He snorted, half laugh, half mockery. "Politeness won't keep you dry, bride." Zoe bit her tongue, choosing silence. She still wasn't sure what she was doing, following a stranger into the woods. But compared to going back to the church, where her stepmother Evelyn was probably giving a Zoe's just overwhelmed speech, this guy's cabin was the lesser evil, slightly. Eventually they reached a clearing among the pines. A small wooden cabin stood there, sturdy with a sloped roof, a stack of chopped firewood by the wall, and warm yellow light glowing from the windows. Despite being drenched, Zoe felt a tiny flicker of warmth. Miles pushed open the door and gestured inside. "Don't mess up the floor," he grunted. Rusty bounded in, spraying water everywhere, completely ignoring the command. Zoe stepped inside, hugging herself to stop shivering. The cabin was simple but cozy. A worn-out sofa, a crackling fireplace, and a scratched wooden table. The air smelled faintly of burning wood and coffee. She glanced around, looking for clues, maybe a family photo or a diploma, to figure out who this guy was. But there was nothing. Just a bookshelf packed with technical manuals and detective novels. "Don't just stand there dripping all over the place," Miles said, tossing her a worn-out towel. "Dry off and take off that dress." Zoe blinked, clutching the towel tighter. "Take off the dress? Are you serious? I don't even know if you're not some serial killer." Miles crossed his arms, scowling. "If I were a killer, you wouldn't still be standing here arguing with me. Bathroom's over there. I'll get you some clothes, unless you want to spend the night in a wet dress." Zoe opened her mouth to argue, but the chill in her bones made her think twice. She glared just to salvage some pride, then shuffled to the bathroom, leaving a watery trail on the wooden floor. The bathroom was tiny, with an old sink and a foggy mirror. Zoe looked at herself, hair plastered to her face, mascara smudged, wedding dress now resembling a luxurious mop. She sighed and peeled off the dress, letting it drop in a soggy heap. The towel Miles gave her smelled faintly of soap, and though she hated to admit it, it offered a strange kind of comfort. When she came out, wrapped in the towel, Miles was by the stove with his back turned. A flannel shirt and a pair of old sweatpants were neatly folded on the sofa. Zoe slipped into them quickly. The fabric was soft and still warm. The sleeves went way past her hands, but at least she wasn't shivering anymore. "Thanks," she said, voice quieter than she meant. "For this." Miles turned, glanced at her, and nodded. "Sit. I'm making noodles." Zoe raised an eyebrow. "Noodles? You mean like instant ramen?" "Got a problem with that?" he asked, challenging. "Or do brides only eat caviar?" She crossed her arms and flopped onto the sofa. "I lived on ramen in college, thank you very much. I just thought you'd make something, I don't know, woodsier, like homemade pumpkin soup or something." Miles chuckled, his first laugh since they met. It was low and short, but enough to surprise her. "Pumpkin soup," he repeated, shaking his head. "You're such a drama queen." "I am not a drama queen," Zoe shot back, though even she heard the childish tone in her voice. "I'm just having a terrible day, okay?" Miles didn't reply. He poured the noodles into 2 bowls and handed her one with a fork. "Eat, then tell me why you ran from your wedding." Zoe held the fork but didn't dig in right away. She stared at the steam rising from the bowl, reminded of late college nights dreaming about freedom. "I don't want to talk about it," she said, her voice harder than she intended. "Just know that I didn't want to marry that guy." Miles sat across from her, his bowl steaming. Who was he? A politician? Some rich guy? Or just a jackass you couldn't stand? Zoe frowned. "Why do you care? You don't even know me." "Because you're in my house, wearing my clothes, eating my noodles," Miles said evenly. "And I don't like drama. If you're bringing trouble here, I'd like a heads up. Zoe stabbed at the noodles, twirling them with frustration. There's no drama. I just didn't want to live a life someone else picked for me. That's all. Miles stared at her like he was trying to read her mind. So you bolted. No plan, no bag. Just a pair of red sneakers and a dress now dying in my bathroom? Zoe smirked, though the smile didn't reach her eyes. Exactly. I'm a planning genius, can't you tell? He snorted again, but it was softer this time. Eat your noodles, genius, before they get cold. They ate in silence, broken only by the crackling fire and Rusty's snoring. The warmth of the food seeped into Zoe's chest. She stole a glance at Miles, who was focused on his bowl like it held the secrets of the universe. He wasn't movie star handsome, too angular, too gruff, but there was something about him that intrigued her. A man who lived in the woods with no TV, no buzzing phone, but shelves full of tech books. Who was he? What about you? She asked, breaking the silence. Why do you live out here like some recluse? Miles paused mid-chew, looking up. Recluse? Yeah, like a hermit. You know, hiding from the world, living with your dog and ramen. He shrugged, returning to his noodles. I like quiet. Not everyone needs to live in a soap opera like you. Zoe threw down her fork, annoyed. I told you I'm not a drama queen. Can you please stop calling me that? Miles raised an eyebrow, but the corner of his mouth twitched. Fine, but you have to admit, running from a wedding in the rain, crashing into me, and now arguing over noodles? Little bit dramatic. Zoe opened her mouth to argue, but laughed instead. It burst out unexpectedly, bright and genuine, startling Rusty awake. Okay, she said, still laughing. Maybe a little bit dramatic. Miles looked at her, and for a moment, his gaze softened. Then he stood, collecting his bowl. You sleep on the sofa. I'll grab you a blanket. But tomorrow morning, bride, you need to find somewhere else. This ain't a B&B. Zoe nodded, but deep down, she knew she couldn't leave in the morning. Not because of the rain or the lack of a plan, but because, for the first time in years, she could breathe. Chapter 3. The Secret Inside the Cabin. Zoe woke up on Miles's old couch, morning light streaming through the wooden window and casting shimmering stripes across the floor. She blinked, trying to remember where she was. The lingering scent of burning wood from the fireplace mixed with the sound of Rusty scratching at the door, begging to go outside. Miles's oversized flannel shirt draped past her knees, the sleeves hanging awkwardly long, but it gave her a strange sense of safety, something she rarely felt back at Evelyn's house. She sat up, smoothing her tangled hair. Last night, after a bowl of ramen and a half-playful, half-heated argument with Miles, she dozed off without thinking about what she'd do next. Now reality hit her. No money, no phone, no plan. Just a pair of muddy red Converse by the door and a grumpy man who had already declared she needed to leave this morning. Morning, bride, Miles's voice called from the kitchen corner, where he was pouring coffee into a chipped mug. He wore a gray t-shirt and worn jeans, his brown hair tousled like Rusty had licked it into shape. Figured you'd sleep till noon. Zoe winced and pulled the blanket over half her face. Thanks for the concern, but I'm not a bride, okay? Just Zoe. Miles shrugged and set another mug in front of her. Drink, then pack. This isn't a bed and breakfast. Zoe wrapped her hands around the mug, warmth spreading through her fingers. She took a sip. The strong, bitter taste jolted her awake. Pack? You think that soggy wedding dress in your bathroom is my entire fortune? He crossed his arms, leaning against the counter, expression unreadable. Not my problem. You said no drama. Handle it. Zoe bit her lip and looked out the window. The lush green pines stretched endlessly, no sign of anyone around. She knew she couldn't return to Maplewood. Not yet. Her stepmother Evelyn had probably blasted every social feed from here to New York with Zoe Campbell is missing, just to save face. And Richard, that senator groom, was no doubt furious she'd humiliated him in front of 100 guests. She needed time and a place to hide. Look, Zoe said gently, though her mind was already calculating. I know you don't want me here, but I have nowhere else to go. Just a couple days, please? I can help around. Cleaning, cooking, whatever. I'm a wedding planner, you know. I'm good at organizing. Miles raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed. A wedding planner? You ran away from your own wedding, and now you want me to believe you're good at planning? Zoe flushed, but didn't back down. That's what makes me good. I know everything about weddings, including how to cancel one. She smirked, hoping a little humor would soften him. Miles studied her, eyes sharp like he was trying to measure how much trust she was worth. Then he sighed, the kind of sigh people give right before doing something they already regret. 2 days, he said. Then you go. And if anyone knocks, I'll say I never saw you. Zoe nodded quickly, hiding her smile. Thank you, Miles. You won't regret it. Already do, he muttered, heading to grab Rusty's leash. Over the next 2 days, Zoe did everything she could to prove she was useful. She swept floors, dusted bookshelves, even tried to organize the chaotic pile of tools in the cabin's corner, though Miles immediately barked, "Don't touch my stuff." She wasn't a great cook, but managed a batch of slightly burned toast that Rusty happily devoured. Miles, in contrast, kept to his routines, chopping wood, fixing the porch, or disappearing into the woods with Rusty for hours. But what intrigued Zoe most was the small back room in the cabin. The door was always closed, and Miles never invited her in. One afternoon, while he was out gathering firewood, curiosity got the best of her. She nudged the door open, planning just a peek, only to freeze at the sight inside. The room was small but packed with papers and diagrams. A large wooden desk took up most of the space, covered in complex technical schematics, black ink lines forming curves and charts she didn't understand. In one corner sat an old laptop, its dim screen glowing with a never-ending string of code. On the wall, sticky notes were scattered, with terms like API, blockchain, and neural network. Zoe frowned. This wasn't the lair of some forest hermit. She stepped in carefully, avoiding contact with anything. One drawing caught her eye, a circular network map with interlinked nodes. She tilted her head, trying to recall something from college computer science. Network protocol, she mumbled. Who lives like this and builds this stuff? What are you doing in here? Zoe jumped, turning to see Miles at the door, small axe in hand, expression dark. Rusty stood beside him, giving her the look of a disappointed parent. I was just cleaning, she squeaked. It was so messy, I thought. Out, Miles cut her off coldly. Now. Zoe swallowed hard and quickly stepped out, heart pounding. She wasn't exactly afraid of him, but the look in his eyes had crossed an invisible line. In the kitchen, she stood silently, waiting for him to speak. Miles shut the room's door, not locking it, but the gesture said enough. He turned back, set the axe on the table, and stared at her. I told you, don't touch my things. I'm sorry, Zoe said, genuinely contrite for the first time. I was just curious. Those diagrams, are you an engineer or a programmer? Miles didn't answer right away. He took a slow sip of water, as if deciding whether to speak at all. I do a few things, he finally said. None of your business? Zoe crossed her arms, not ready to let it go. Come on, Miles. You live like a lumberjack, but that room looks like Tony Stark's lab. You can't expect me not to be curious. He snorted, but this time without a trace of humor. Curiosity doesn't pay for breaking into my space. Do something useful, or I'll rethink those 2 days. Zoe wanted to argue, but his eyes silenced her. She nodded, turned away, but in her head the questions kept swirling. Miles wasn't just some reclusive woodsman. He knew code, built tech diagrams, and lived like someone hiding from something. She'd run from a wedding, but Miles, what was he running from? That night they ate dinner in silence. Mashed potatoes and beans Miles had cooked. Simple but better than anything Zoe ever had at home. She wanted to apologize again, but every time she looked at him, she saw a wall. As she lay on the couch watching the firelight flicker, Zoe realized something. She wasn't just staying because she had nowhere to go. She was staying because, even if Miles was gruff and called her drama queen, he was the first person who didn't expect her to be anything but herself. And that room full of secrets, it made her want to stay even longer, just to understand him, and maybe to finally understand herself. Chapter 4. The Bride, wet hair, and a strange look. 2 days at Miles's cabin passed quicker than Zoe had expected. She'd swept the floor, burned the toast, and nearly toppled his stack of firewood, all in the name of proving she was useful enough to stay. But this morning the deadline of 2 days had arrived, and Zoe knew he wasn't the kind of man to change his mind easily. Standing in the bathroom, she stared at her tangled hair and the mud-caked red Converse sneakers, wondering where she would go next. Returning to Maplewood meant facing her stepmother, Evelyn, and Senator Richard. Going out into the woods alone? She wasn't exactly cast in a survival film. Then, like a gift from above, the storm rolled in. Rain poured down all afternoon, wind howled through the pine forest, and when the first thunderclap hit, Zoe nearly jumped with joy. "The storm," she whispered, clenching her fists. "My lifesaver." Now it was nighttime, and the storm hadn't let up. A deafening crack of thunder shook the windows, and the whole cabin plunged into darkness as the power cut out. The fireplace was the only source of light, casting flickering amber shadows across the wooden walls. Zoe, curled on the sofa with a mystery novel borrowed from Miles's bookshelf, dropped the book with a yelp. "Fantastic," she muttered. "I'm officially in a horror movie." Miles, sitting in his armchair with a chipped coffee mug, didn't even glance up. "Power outage. Happens all the time out here. Calm down, bride." Zoe shot him a glare through the dim light. "My name's Zoe, not Bride. And how am I supposed to stay calm when it sounds like the forest is trying to kill us?" He shrugged, sipping his coffee. "The house is still standing. You're the only one panicking." Zoe folded her arms, trying to look brave, but the next crack of thunder made her jump. Rusty, asleep by the fire, lifted his head and gave her a look that clearly said, "Relax, rookie." She sighed and pulled the blanket tighter around her. Her hair, still damp from doing the dishes earlier, clung to her neck, sending a shiver down her spine. Miles stood, set his mug down, and walked to the fireplace. He tossed in another log and the flames surged, casting sharper light across his angular features. Zoe found herself watching him. In the firelight, he looked different, not like the gruff man who had kicked her out of his secret room, but like someone carrying a story he hadn't told. "What are you looking at?" Miles asked, not turning around but clearly aware of her gaze. Zoe blushed, grateful for the dark. "Nothing. Just wondering what you do during a blackout. Not like you can sit and code in the dark, right?" He snorted, almost a laugh. "Number I sit, think, or don't think. Depends." "Sounds thrilling," Zoe teased lightly. "So is hermit life always this fun? No Netflix, no Wi-Fi, just you, Rusty, and whatever storm saves people like me from getting kicked out?" Miles turned, sat on the floor near the fireplace, a few feet from her. His eyes flicked to hers, not as sharp as usual. "Saves you? You mean the excuse to stay even though I said today was your deadline?" Zoe blinked, caught. I didn't say that. I just meant, look at the storm. You wouldn't throw me out in this, right? I'd drown or get struck by lightning." He smirked, not quite his usual sarcastic one. "You're pretty good at finding excuses, Zoe." She grinned, feigning pride. "Survival skills, you should try them sometime." Silence fell between them again, broken only by the storm raging outside and the crackling fire. Zoe hugged her knees to her chest, eyes fixed on the flames. She hadn't meant to say anything, not really, but something about the darkness, the warmth, and the strange safety of this cabin made her speak. "My dad had a lot of debt," she said softly, her voice nearly drowned by the rain. "He died 5 years ago. Car accident. He wasn't a bad man, just a dreamer. My stepmother, Evelyn, came in after that, said she'd fix everything, but all she wanted was the family name. She pushed me to marry Richard to save our reputation." Miles said nothing, just watched her, firelight flickering in his eyes. Zoe continued, not sure why she was telling him. Maybe because he wasn't asking. Maybe because his silence made her feel heard. "Richard's a senator. On paper, he's perfect. Wealthy, charming, says the right things. But he never loved me. He needed a wife for his campaign. And I'm just tired of living for other people." She let out a dry laugh, shaking her head. Guess you were right. Drama queen all the way. Miles remained silent, but his eyes changed. No more mockery, no distance. Something gentler flickered there, like he was seeing her for the first time. Not as a runaway bride or the girl who trespassed in his secret room, but just Zoe, someone trying to find herself. You're not a drama queen, he said quietly. You're just looking for a way out. Zoe blinked, surprised. His words, simple as they were, reached somewhere deep in her, a place that always felt too weak to stand up to Evelyn or Richard. She opened her mouth to make a joke, but couldn't. Instead, she whispered, "Thank you. I mean, for not throwing me out, storm or not." Miles gave a rare half smile. "Don't thank me yet. When the storm's gone, you're still out of here." She laughed. Chapter 5. The Seeker and the Smile in the Garden. The storm had saved Zoe from being kicked out of Miles's cabin, but now the morning sun filtered through the pines, signaling that her time was almost up. She sat on the sofa, her muddy red Converse tossed beside her, trying to think of a new excuse to stay. Miles, as usual, was in the kitchen, pouring coffee into a chipped mug, his face devoid of sympathy. "Don't look at me like that," he said without glancing up. "The storm's over. You know the deal." Zoe bit her lip and hugged her knees. I know. But look, I've got nowhere to go. And I cleaned the chicken coop. The chicken coop, Miles, that earns me at least one more day, right?" Miles raised an eyebrow, but before he could respond, the sound of a car engine rumbled down the trail. Rusty, lying sprawled on the floor, perked his ears and barked. Zoe froze. No one had come to the cabin in the 4 days she'd been there. No neighbors, no friends, no one. Miles set his mug down, his gaze sharp. "Stay here," he ordered, walking toward the door. Zoe scooted to the window, pulling back the curtain slightly to peek outside. A sleek black SUV had pulled up in the yard, and a woman stepped out, blonde hair in a high ponytail, navy blazer, holding a phone like a weapon. A reporter. Zoe swallowed hard. She knew this type, the scandal-chasing, hawk-eyed kind. "Hello," the woman called out, her voice sweet but edged. "I'm Lauren Tate from the Vermont Chronicle. I'm doing a piece on a missing bride from Maplewood. Have you seen anyone unusual around here?" Zoe backed away from the window, heart pounding. She could already see the headline, "Runaway Bride Shocks Town." Her stepmother Evelyn had definitely leaked the story, spinning it into town-wide drama to save face. She glanced at Miles, expecting him to point to the cabin and say, "She's in there." But Miles crossed his arms, leaning against the doorframe, his voice steady. "Missing bride? Haven't seen anyone unusual. Just me, the dog, and some chickens. You sure you're in the right place?" Lauren squinted, clearly unconvinced. "That's odd. There are rumors of a young woman seen near these woods, wearing a wedding dress. You are..." "Miles Donovan, farm owner. I live alone and I like it that way. If a bride ran through here, I'd have noticed. But nope." He shrugged, his face so calm that even Zoe almost believed him. Lauren nodded slowly, her eyes scanning the cabin like she wanted to barge in and search it. "If you see anything, here's my card. This story's blowing up on X. People are saying she ran because of family drama." Miles took the card and shoved it into his jeans pocket without looking. "I don't use X. Thanks for stopping by. Good luck." Lauren hesitated, then returned to her car, not forgetting to shoot one last glance at the cabin. When the SUV finally disappeared down the trail, Zoe exhaled and leaned against the wall. Miles walked back in, shut the door, and glared at her. "You owe me one," he said. "And don't think I did it because I like you. I just hate reporters." Zoe smirked, trying to hide a smile. "Thanks, Miles. Really. You were quite the actor. Farm owner, huh? I almost believed you actually raised chickens for a living." He snorted, turning back to his coffee. "Don't get used to this, but if you want to stay, you've got to work. There's a garden outside. Weed it, plant something. Don't make me regret lying." Zoe nodded enthusiastically, heart lightened. Not only did she get to stay, she had something to do besides hiding. "I'll make that garden the prettiest you've ever seen. Consider it me paying you back." That afternoon, Zoe headed to the backyard behind the cabin, where a small plot of land was enclosed by a wooden fence. The soil was damp from the storm, weeds scattered everywhere, but there were a few vegetable rows and a corner of empty dirt. Miles handed her a bag of seeds, marigold, forget-me-nots, and lavender, along with an old watering can. "Plant these," he said, then stood nearby like a supervisor. Zoe knelt down, her hands digging into the dirt, the feeling foreign but freeing. Back home, her stepmother Evelyn never let her do anything beneath her, like gardening. Everything had to be perfect, from her manicure to her smile. But here, no one was judging. She buried the seeds, humming an old pop song softly, and laughed when Rusty tried to dig beside her. "Look, Rusty," she said, holding up a clump of soil. "I'm a real farmer now." Rusty barked, tail wagging like crazy. Zoe looked up to find Miles holding the watering can, watching her with a half-smile. "You're doing it wrong," he said, pointing at the row. "Lavender needs spacing. You're making a jungle." Zoe scrunched her nose but didn't argue. "All right, garden expert. Show me how it's done." Miles knelt beside her, picking up a lavender seed and placing it gently in the soil. "Like this. Not too deep, not too close." He glanced at her. "You've never planted anything before, have you?" "I have, once. I planted tomatoes in a pot. It died in a week." Miles chuckled, a low, rare sound that even made Rusty look up in surprise. "You're a disaster," he said, but without malice. Zoe smirked and grabbed the watering can from him. "Lucky for me, you're here to fix disasters. Now water, farm boss." She tilted the can, pouring a stream of water onto the row, but Miles suddenly reached out and blocked it, splashing her shirt. Zoe shrieked and backed up. "What was that for? I'm soaked." "Payback for the burnt toast," Miles replied with a grin, flicking more water at her. Zoe gaped, then burst out laughing, snatched the watering can back, and splashed him in return. Water flew everywhere. Miles's flannel shirt was soaked, his hair clinging to his forehead. He glared at her, but his eyes sparkled with joy. "Oh, you want to play that game?" he said, dashing to the spigot near the fence, turning it on and grabbing the hose. Zoe screamed, running around the garden, but it was no use. The cold spray caught her full on. She collapsed into the grass, laughing so hard it hurt, and yanked Miles down with her. They lay on the ground, drenched, laughing like children. Rusty barked and bounded over, licking their faces and turning the chaos up another notch. "God, you're awful," Zoe yelled between laughs, wiping water off her face. "I look like a drowned rat." Miles propped himself up, his wet hair plastered to his forehead. "You started it. Don't blame me." Zoe smirked and tossed a handful of wet grass at him. "Call it even, but I win because you laughed." Miles shook his head, the smile still on his lips. "You're nothing but trouble." Zoe lay back, staring at the blue sky through the pine branches, a wave of freedom washing over her. For the first time, she wasn't thinking about Evelyn, Richard, or the media. She was just Zoe, muddy, soaking wet, and happy. That night, Zoe offered to make jam with some strawberries Miles had picked the week before. She wasn't a great cook, but she wanted to try. The kitchen turned into a war zone. Sugar everywhere, squished berries and jam stuck in her hair. Miles stood watching, shaking his head at first, but eventually stirred the pot himself, mumbling about culinary disasters. "That's the third time you spilled sugar," he said as she almost dropped the whole bag. "But I'm an adorable disaster, right?" Zoe winked, holding up a spoonful of jam. "Taste it. I bet you'll like it." Miles tasted it, then nodded with mild surprise. "Not bad. Actually edible." Zoe beamed like she'd won a gold medal. As they sat eating jam on bread, the warm yellow lights in the cabin made everything feel strangely cozy. Zoe glanced at Miles, breaking off a piece of bread for Rusty, and thought, "This place isn't just a hiding spot. It's where I found myself." Still following the story? If this story found you outside of Soul Stories, we invite you home, to where every touching tale begins with truth, hope, and heart. Chapter 6. A USB drive and a buried past. It had been 2 months since Zoe crashed into Miles in the woods, and his cabin had become an inseparable part of her life. The early days, burnt toast, messy chicken coops, and their hilarious bickering had given way to a natural, freeing rhythm she'd never known in Evelyn's suffocating house. She weeded the garden, planted lavender, made strawberry jam, and even learned how to chop firewood, though Miles still snickered every time she almost dropped the axe. Rusty, the scruffy dog, was now more attached to her than to Miles, often sprawled beside her as she read mystery novels on the couch. The strangest thing was the unspoken bond between her and Miles. They never talked about it, but it was there. In the way he quietly set out a cup of coffee for her each morning, in how she teased him whenever Rusty clearly preferred her, or during the quiet evenings by the fireplace when they shared little stories, never digging too deep. Zoe was no longer the runaway bride in his eyes, and he was no longer just the grumpy hermit in hers. She looked at him, messy hair, thoughtful eyes, a rare but warm smile, and thought, this place is home. He is home. Life at the cabin was untamed and peaceful, with no judgmental glances from Evelyn, no pressure from Senator Richard, no gossip trending on X. But that morning, as Miles went out to check the fence with Rusty, Zoe felt uneasy. Reporter Lauren Tate had shown up a few weeks back, and though Miles had thrown her off, Zoe knew her stepmother wouldn't stop. She needed a long-term plan, but deep down, she didn't want to leave. Not when she had finally found where she belonged. She swept the floor, wiped the table, but her mind kept drifting back to the secret room, the one filled with text sketches and an old laptop she had glimpsed last month. Miles had strictly forbidden her from entering, and she'd respected that. But after 2 months of living together, her curiosity stirred again. Who is he really, she wondered. He knew too much about programming, about AI, yet lived like a farmer. She didn't want to judge him. She just wanted to understand him. Just a peek, Zoe whispered, pushing open the door. The room looked the same, a wooden desk cluttered with technical diagrams, notes with words like blockchain and neural network, and a dusty old laptop in the corner. A small black USB stick, loosely plugged into the laptop, caught her eye. Faint letters were engraved on it. MD, Project 17. Miles Donovan, she murmured, heart pounding. She knew she shouldn't, but her hand moved toward the mouse. The screen lit up. No password, which surprised her, since Miles seemed like a cautious man. She clicked the USB icon, and a folder opened, filled with PDF files. One file stood out. Forbes_2018MD.pdf. Her brows furrowed. She double-clicked it, and her heart stopped. The Forbes article loaded Miles Donovan, the tech genius behind a billion-dollar empire. A younger Miles in a suit stood in front of the Neuralink Solutions logo. The piece praised him as a pioneer in AI and blockchain, a CEO who took his company public with a multi-billion-dollar valuation before turning 30. Estimated net worth, $500 million. Youngest face on Forbes, 30 under 30. Zoe skimmed, her jaw dropping. She scrolled down and found another article. Neuralink CEO disappears after personal tragedy. Miles Donovan, 30, withdrew from his company after the death of his fiancée, Emily Harper, in a car accident. No one knows where he is now. A small photo showed Miles, head bowed at a funeral, eyes empty. Zoe sat frozen, her hands trembling. Miles, the man who shared jam with her, who laughed when she splashed him in the garden, was a millionaire? A once famous CEO? She tried to process it, but her mind spun. He hadn't just escaped the world. He had fled from a grief too deep for words, and she had just trespassed into it. The front door creaked open. Zoe hurried to close the laptop, but it was too late. Miles stood at the doorway, his flannel shirt dusty, eyes darkened. Rusty stood beside him, silent, sensing the storm coming. "What are you doing in here?" Miles's voice was ice, every word a dagger. Zoe jumped up, backing away, hands raised in guilt. "Miles, I was just looking. I saw the USB and..." "Looking?" Miles stepped inside, voice rising, full of fury. "You went through my things after I told you clearly not to come in here? After 2 months, you still don't respect me?" Zoe swallowed, heart racing. I'm sorry, I mean it. I didn't mean to. I was just curious. I saw the article about Neuralink, about Emily. Don't say her name. Miles cut her off, voice cracking. Not just angry, but broken. His fists clenched, trying to stay composed. You had no right to dig into my past. Zoe's eyes burned, not from fear, but because she realized she had broken the most precious thing between them, trust. I didn't want to hurt you, she said, voice shaking. I just wanted to understand you. We've lived together for 2 months, Miles. You're important to me. I see how you live now, but you used to be a CEO. You had the world. I wanted to know why you gave it up. Miles looked at her, eyes like blades, but beneath them, a pain that cut deeper. Why? Because that world took her from me. Because I couldn't save her. And you, Zoe, you think you can understand that just by digging through my stuff? She shook her head, stepping closer, though he pulled back. I'm not judging. I'm running too, Miles. From Evelyn, from a wedding, from a life that never felt like mine. I thought we were the same. I thought this place was home because of you. Miles let out a bitter laugh, sharp and cold. Home? You stay here, eat jam, plant flowers, and think this is home. You know nothing about me. You're just like them, reporters, the public, always wanting more than what I give. His words struck like a slap. Zoe stood still, tears rolling down her cheeks. I'm not like them, she whispered. I'm sorry for opening the USB. I care about you. He turned away, gripping the doorframe. Care? If you cared, you wouldn't have come in here. I let you stay because I thought you were different. But I was wrong. Zoe choked back words, wanting to tell him she wasn't like Lauren Tate or Evelyn. But the pain in his eyes stopped her. I'll leave, she said quietly. Tomorrow morning. I don't want to hurt you anymore. Miles didn't reply. He just walked out and slammed the door. Rusty looked at Zoe, whined softly as if trying to comfort her. She sank to the floor, hugging her knees, tears falling. For 2 months, she had thought the cabin was home, that Miles understood her, but now she felt like nothing more than an intruder who had reopened the wounds of a man who'd already lost everything. That night they didn't speak. Miles stayed outside with Rusty, while Zoe lay on the sofa, staring at the fireplace. She thought of the morning coffees, the garden water fights, Miles's rare smiles. She thought of Emily, the woman he had loved, and wondered if he had ever been as happy with her as he had been with Zoe. She wanted to fix it, but she knew by morning she had to go, not because he asked her to, but because she had broken his trust. As she closed her eyes, the image of the USB and the words MD haunted her. She had uncovered Miles's secret, but at the cost of losing the only home she had ever truly wanted. Chapter 7. I Can't Trust Rich Men. The faint light of dawn crept through the cabin window, casting a pale glow across the wooden floor where Zoe sat, hugging her knees. She hadn't slept, not because of the hard sofa or the wind howling through the pines, but because of Miles's words from the night before, still echoing in her mind. You're just like them, always digging, always wanting more than I offer. She had thought that 2 months of living together, coffee mornings, garden water fights, his rare but genuine smiles, had made them something more than strangers. But that USB drive and the secrets about Miles's past had shattered it all. Her eyes drifted to her muddy red Converse by the door, the only thing she had left from the day she ran away from her wedding. She had to leave, not just because Miles wanted her to, but because she couldn't stay when the trust between them had broken. And yet the thought of leaving the cabin, where she had found freedom, where she thought she belonged, made her heart ache. Miles stepped in from the back porch, Rusty trailing lazily behind him. He didn't look at her. He just walked straight to the kitchen and poured his usual morning coffee. But today he didn't pour a second cup. The silence between them was no longer the comfortable kind they shared by the fireplace. It was heavy. Zoe stood, took a deep breath, and broke it. I'll go, she said, her voice calmer than she felt. Today, I just need to borrow a coat and maybe a little bus fare. I'll pay it back. Miles paused, gripping his mug tighter, but still didn't look at her. Money's in the box on the shelf. Coats are in the closet. Take what you need. His voice was cold, but Zoe heard a crack, small, like he was trying to hide something. She wanted to apologize again, to tell him she hadn't meant to hurt him, but the sting from last night was still raw inside her. She walked over to the shelf, took a few dollars, then opened the closet and chose an old flannel coat. The scent of pine and coffee from it caught her off guard. She turned back to face him. "Miles," she began, her voice trembling. "I'm sorry for looking at the USB. I really didn't mean to hurt you, but you can't blame me for being curious. For 2 months, I thought you trusted me, like I trusted you. But you hid a whole life from me. CEO, Forbes, millions of dollars. Who are you, really?" Miles finally looked at her, his gaze sharp but tired. "I'm who you've seen. The man who chops wood, feeds his dog, lives in the woods. The rest doesn't matter. It died with her." Zoe shook her head, her eyes glassy. "Doesn't matter? Miles, you had the whole world and you left it behind. I'm not judging you, but I deserve to know the truth. I told you about my dad, about Evelyn, about Richard. I opened up, but you only gave me fragments." He let out a bitter laugh, setting his mug down harder than necessary. "Opened up? You went through my stuff, Zoe. That's not opening up. That's invasion. You want the truth? The truth is, I lost Emily, and I don't want anyone else digging through that pain." His words hit like a slap. Zoe stepped forward, her voice rising, no longer able to hold back. "I'm not a reporter, and I'm not Evelyn. I care about you, Miles. I thought I might be falling in love with you, but I can't trust a rich man who lives off secrets. I almost married a man like that. Richard, with his money and lies. I'm not going through that again." The moment the words left her mouth, she regretted them, but it was too late. Miles's face paled, his expression hardening. "Love me," he repeated, voice low but sharp. "You don't even know me, Zoe, and if you think I'm like that senator, then yeah, you should leave." She froze, tears slipping down her cheeks. She wanted to take it back, to tell him she hadn't meant to compare him to Richard, that she was just scared of being hurt again. But pride and pain held her tongue. She nodded, voice tight. "Fine, I won't bother you anymore." Zoe slipped on her Converse, shrugged into the coat, and stuffed the money into her pocket. She glanced at Rusty, whining softly by the door like he wanted to stop her. She stroked his head gently. "Thanks for being my friend, buddy." Then she opened the door, stepped out into the yard, and didn't look back. Every step along the gravel trail weighed down her heart. The cold wind swept through, carrying the scent of pine and memories of freedom, planting flowers, making jam, laughing with Miles. She had thought this cabin was home, but now it was just a place she no longer belonged. Miles stood in the cabin, watching through the window as Zoe's figure disappeared into the pines. Rusty whimpered, pawing at the door, but Miles didn't move. His chest felt hollow, as if something vital had been carved out of him without warning. He had grown used to her presence, the soft hum of her voice while gardening, the way she teased him about ramen, the bright smile she wore when watering lavender. In 2 months, she had brought life back into the cabin, made him forget the pain of Emily, even if just a little. But now she was gone, and he was the one who pushed her away. Her words, "I can't trust a rich man who lives off secrets," had cut deep. He wasn't Richard, wasn't that scheming senator. But he couldn't blame her. He had hidden so much from her, not just Neuralink or Forbes, but the man he used to be. He had been too afraid to open up, too afraid to lose someone again. He sank onto the sofa, her usual sleeping spot, his hand brushing the blanket she always wrapped around herself. Her scent lingered, lavender and strawberry jam. Rusty lay beside him, eyes full of accusation. "Don't look at me like that," Miles muttered. She made her choice. But as his gaze swept over the cabin, the bookshelf she organized, the jar of jam on the table, the flower beds outside, emptiness rushed in. He had thought letting her go was self-preservation, but all he felt now was regret. She wasn't Emily, but she was Zoe, The only person who'd made him want to live again, not just survive. He stood, grabbed his coat, then paused. Chase after her? Say what? That I was wrong? That I'm scared? That she matters to me? He clenched his fists, then released them. Number she deserved better than a man buried in the past, hiding in the woods. Miles turned back to the fireplace, tossed in another log, but the flames couldn't warm the cold that had returned. For the first time in 2 months, the cabin felt lonely again. Chapter 8. A New Wedding and an Old Promise. Zoe Campbell stepped into the old house in Maplewood feeling like a prisoner returning to her cell. 2 months in Miles's cabin, surrounded by lavender, strawberry jam, and his rare quiet smiles, now felt like a luxurious memory. She had walked for hours from the forest trail to the bus station, using the few dollars Miles had given her to buy a ticket back to town. With every step away from the cabin, she felt like she was leaving behind a part of herself, the part that had known freedom, happiness, and peace in the pine woods of Vermont. Her stepmother Evelyn stood waiting at the door, lips pressed into a hard line, eyes sharp as knives. "You disgrace this family," she said by way of greeting. "Running out on Richard's wedding? Do you have any idea how far the gossip spread on X? Luckily, I handled it. I told everyone you had a stress breakdown. Now get inside, clean up, and get ready. We have business to attend to." Zoe stood still, her dirty red Converse scuffing the polished hardwood floor. "What business?" she asked, though she already suspected the answer. Evelyn crossed her arms, her voice icy. "Marriage. This time to Derek, Richard's business associate. He's not a senator, but he's rich enough to salvage this family's reputation. You ruined your chance with Richard, but I won't let you ruin everything." Zoe let out a bitter laugh, too drained to be angry. "Marriage? Are you serious? I just ran away from a wedding, and you think I'm going to obediently do it all over again?" Evelyn stepped forward, her glare like nails pinning Zoe in place. "You have no choice, Zoe. Our family is drowning in debt thanks to your father. Derek agreed to wipe it clean if you marry him. Don't be selfish. Think of me. Think of the family name." Zoe wanted to scream, to say she didn't care about the family name, that she'd rather live in the woods with Miles than be Evelyn's puppet. But the image of Miles, his pained expression when she mentioned Emily, his cold voice telling her to leave, silenced her. She had nowhere else to run. She nodded, her voice quiet. "Fine, but just this once." Evelyn smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Good. The ceremony will be small, at the Grand Maple Hotel next week. None of that spectacle from last time. You just need to sign the paper and smile for the guests." Zoe turned and walked up the stairs, her Converse suddenly feeling like they weighed 100 pounds. She didn't cry. She'd done enough of that on the bus ride back. All she wanted was for it to be over. The Grand Maple Hotel, though modest, was still dazzling with crystal chandeliers and red carpets. The wedding was held in a private banquet room with only a few dozen guests, Evelyn's friends and Derek's associates. Zoe stood in front of the marriage registration table, wearing a simple white dress Evelyn had picked out. No veil, no Converse. She looked at Derek, a middle-aged man with a thin smile and calculating eyes. He wasn't Richard, but he wasn't any better. Just another man who wanted to use her as a decoration for his image. Her hand trembled as she held the pen, ready to sign the marriage license. Her name sat beside Derek's on the paper, and it felt like she was signing a death sentence. She thought of Miles, of the cabin, of Rusty, of the moment they sprayed water on each other in the garden, of the way he looked at her by the fire. She had told him she couldn't trust him, but now all she wanted was to run back to him, even if he didn't want her anymore. Evelyn leaned in, whispering, "Sign it, Zoe. Don't humiliate me again." Zoe took a deep breath and lifted the pen, but before ink touched paper, a deep, familiar voice rang out from the doorway, silencing the room. "She's not signing anything. She's been my wife since the day she walked into my life." Zoe's head snapped up, her heart pounding. Miles stood there in a black suit, his brown hair neatly combed, but still slightly tousled. He looked tall and strong, his eyes locked onto hers with unwavering intensity. Guests murmured in confusion. Evelyn gaped in shock, but Zoe only saw him, the man she thought she had lost forever. "Miles," she whispered, the pen falling from her hand. He walked forward, ignoring Evelyn and Derek's stunned expressions. "I was wrong, Zoe," he said, his voice deep and steady, echoing through the room. "I pushed you away because I was scared. Scared to open up, scared to lose someone again. But you're not Emily, and I'm not that senator or him." He nodded toward Derek with a sharp glare. "You're Zoe, the woman who burns toast, plants lavender, and made me laugh for the first time in years. I can't let you sign that paper." Tears welled in Zoe's eyes, but this time, they weren't from pain. She stepped away from the table and walked toward him, her voice trembling. "Why are you here, Miles? You told me I didn't know you, that I should go." He stopped in front of her, close enough for her to smell that familiar scent of pine and coffee. "I said that because I was a fool. I kept Neuralink and Emily from you, because I thought my secrets would protect me. But losing you, that's something I can't survive." He reached up and gently brushed a tear from her cheek. "I can't promise you the world, Zoe, but I promise you everything I have. My truth, my heart, and a home if you'll have it." Evelyn tried to interrupt, her voice sharp. "Who do you think you are? This is a private ceremony, and Zoe—" "Shut up, Evelyn," Zoe snapped, for the first time unafraid of her stepmother's glare. She looked at Miles, her heart thudding. "Are you serious? After everything, you still want me back?" Miles gave her the warm smile she remembered from the garden. "I've wanted you since the day you ran into me. Muddy wedding dress, red shoes and all. I was just too stupid to admit it." Zoe laughed through her tears. She didn't care about the guests, Derek or Evelyn, fuming in the background. She only saw Miles, the imperfect man who was exactly what she needed. She reached for his hand and whispered, "Take me home." Miles gripped her hand tightly and led her out of the room, leaving behind gasps and stunned stares. As they stepped outside, sunlight poured over them, and Zoe felt like she'd shed a heavy burden. She looked at him, still in his suit, and teased, "Nice suit, but I like you better in flannel." He laughed and pulled her into his arms. "I'll wear flannel for the rest of my life, if that's what you want. Just, please don't burn the toast again, okay?" Zoe lightly punched his shoulder, but her smile didn't fade. As they walked away hand in hand, she knew she wasn't just leaving a wedding. She was heading toward the only place that ever truly felt like home, with Miles, with Rusty, and with rows of lavender waiting for them at the cabin. You're watching Soul Stories, exclusive to our channel. If you're still with us, drop a comment. We read and cherish them all. Subscribe to support more heartfelt original stories. Thanks for being part of the Soul Stories family. Chapter 9. A Kiss on the Glass Rooftop. Zoe gripped Miles's hand tightly as they walked out of the banquet room at the Grand Maple Hotel, the murmurs of the guests and Evelyn's shrill voice fading behind them. The evening sunlight lit the stone pathway outside, making her red Converse, thrown on in a rush before running after Miles, glint with every step. She glanced at him, still in his black suit, his hair tousled slightly by the wind, and felt her heart pounding. Just minutes ago, she had thought she would sign a marriage certificate with Derek, bearing her life in one of Evelyn's deals. Now she was walking beside Miles, the man who had just declared her his wife in front of everyone. "Where are you taking me?" Zoe asked, half teasing, half curious, as Miles led her through the hotel lobby, dodging the confused stares of staff. He glanced at her, the corner of his mouth curling into that familiar smirk, the one that used to melt her back at the cabin. "Don't ask so many questions, bride. Just follow me." Zoe scrunched her nose and gave him a light punch on the arm. "Don't call me bride, and I still haven't forgiven you for letting me leave, Mr. Woodsman." Miles chuckled, his deep, warm laugh echoing down the hallway. "I'll make it up to you. Just trust me this one time." They stepped into the elevator, and Miles hit the button for the rooftop. Zoe raised an eyebrow but didn't ask. She just held his hand tighter, feeling the rough warmth of it. The same hand that chopped wood, watered lavender, and now clung to her as if afraid she might vanish. When the doors opened, a cool breeze carrying the scent of lavender swept in, and Zoe stopped short. In front of them stood a small glass house, built on the hotel rooftop under the amber sky of sunset. The transparent panels glowed in the fading light, and inside, rows of blooming purple lavender swayed gently in the breeze. Zoe stepped forward, her hand brushing the frame, her mouth open in disbelief. "Miles, what is this?" He stood behind her, hands in his pockets, his gaze gentle but tinged with shyness. "I asked a friend to set it up this morning, after I found out you were here. Evelyn was bragging all over X about your new wedding. I couldn't let you sign that paper, Zoe. Not when I knew you loved lavender." Zoe turned to him, eyes glistening, but her smile broke through. "You built an entire glass house? In one day? Just because I like lavender?" Miles shrugged, trying to play it cool, though his cheeks were a little pink. "Not just that. I wanted to show you I'm serious. About you. About us." She stepped into the greenhouse, inhaling the sweet scent of lavender, feeling like she'd been transported back to the garden behind the cabin, where she used to laugh, splash water, and feel free for the first time. She ran her fingers over the delicate petals, then turned to look at Miles standing at the doorway, eyes fixed on her. "When did you start doing all this?" she asked, her voice shaky. Miles stepped inside, closing the distance between them. "Since you left, the cabin, it didn't feel like home without you. Rusty was miserable, and me, I realized I'd been wrong. I pushed you away because I was scared. Scared of feelings, scared of losing someone else." Zoe shook her head, stepping closer, close enough to see the small creases around his eyes. "Miles, I was scared too. I said terrible things. About you, about rich men. I didn't mean to compare you to Richard. I was afraid of being hurt again." He raised his hand and gently touched her cheek, his fingers warm. "I know, and I'm sorry for hiding things from you. About Neuralink, about Emily. I thought secrets would protect me, but they only made me lose you." He paused, taking a deep breath, his eyes locking with hers. "I lost someone once because I didn't believe in feelings. I let Emily go, thinking work and money would be enough. But now, I choose to believe in you, Zoe. In us." Zoe felt her heart stop. She looked at him, the man who had once been gruff, who had pushed her away, now standing before her, vulnerable in a way she'd never seen. She smiled, tears spilling over, but she didn't wipe them away. "You know, Miles Donovan, you're terrible at love confessions, but I choose to believe in you too." Miles smiled, a wide, genuine smile that lit up the entire glass house. He pulled her into his arms and held her tightly, as if afraid she'd disappear. Zoe buried her face into his chest, breathing in the familiar scent of pine and coffee, and felt like she had come home. They stood there surrounded by lavender, under a sky painted with sunset. And for the first time, Zoe didn't fear the future. Then Miles gently pulled back, looking down at her, eyes gleaming. "I have something for you," he said, pulling a small wooden box from his suit pocket. He opened it to reveal a simple silver ring, etched with tiny lavender blossoms. "It's not a wedding ring, not yet. It's just a promise that I won't hide from you again. And if you'll have me, I'll be by your side, at the cabin or wherever you want to be." Zoe blinked, tears falling again, but she laughed through them. "You're such a sap, Miles, but I love it." She held out her hand, letting him slip the cool silver ring on her finger. "I accept the promise, and I want to go home, with you, with Rusty and the garden waiting for us." He grinned, leaned in, and before she could say another word, he kissed her. It was soft but deep, as if he was telling her everything he hadn't said, about the pain, the hope, and the love. Zoe kissed him back, her arms wrapping around his neck, feeling the world fade away. Just them, the lavender and a kiss on a glass rooftop. When they finally pulled apart, Zoe panted, teasing, "If you keep kissing me like that, I'll demand a greenhouse everywhere we go." Miles laughed and pulled her close again. "Don't get greedy, bride, but I'll think about it." They stood there, hand in hand, watching the sky turn purple. Zoe knew their journey wasn't over. There would be fights, secrets to share, wounds to heal, but with Miles beside her, she was ready, because he wasn't just the man she loved. He was the home she'd found, in a field of lavender and a pair of red Converse. Chapter 10. The Bride in Red Shoes. A year had passed since Miles had pulled Zoe out of the Grand Maple Hotel, away from a wedding that was never hers. A year full of morning coffees in the cabin, blooming lavender rose, and playful arguments over who got Rusty too excited. Together they had built a life, not perfect, but real, free, and filled with love. Zoe was no longer the runaway bride, and Miles was no longer the reclusive hermit hiding in the woods. They had become each other's home, and today they were ready to make that official. The wedding took place in a clearing among the pine trees, right near Miles's cabin in Vermont. No fancy hotel, no crystal chandeliers, just towering trees, sunlight trickling through the leaves, and a small lake glistening under the May sky. A few close friends, some rare neighbors from town, a former colleague of Miles's from Neuralink, and even Rusty wearing a red bow tie, gathered in a warm, simple atmosphere. A wooden table held fresh toast, not burnt, thanks to Zoe's month-long practice, and jars of homemade strawberry jam, alongside vases filled with vivid purple lavender. Zoe stood in the cabin, looking at herself in the mirror. Her wedding dress was simple, soft white silk, no frills, no veil, exactly how she wanted it. But the real highlight was her red Converse sneakers, clean, but still bearing the quiet marks of the days spent running, planting flowers, and splashing water with Miles. She smiled, smoothing her hair, thinking of the day she crashed into him in the woods, her dress muddy and heart lost. Who would have guessed that moment would bring her here? "You ready, bride?" Miles called from outside, his voice teasing but warm. Zoe smirked and stepped out. He was standing there, not in a tux, but in a white shirt and jeans, with his flannel jacket casually slung over his shoulder. Pure Miles, just the way she loved him. Rusty barked excitedly, running circles around them as if he too knew what this day meant. Zoe laughed and took Miles's hand. "Ready, but stop calling me bride and farm boy." Miles pulled her close and whispered, "You'll always be my bride, especially in those red shoes." They walked into the clearing, hand in hand, under the soft gazes of their friends. One of Miles's old friends, now a self-declared efficient, stood by the lake with a small notebook in hand. No fancy rituals, just simple vows. Zoe looked at Miles, her heart racing as he began. "Zoe Campbell," he said, voice deep and steady, eyes locked on hers. "I used to think I didn't need anyone, that being alone in the woods was enough, and then you showed up, in a muddy wedding dress and red sneakers, and turned everything upside down. You made me laugh again. You made me feel alive again. I promise to love you, protect you, and never hide anything from you again. I don't need anything more than you, and those shoes." Zoe laughed, tears in her eyes, but kept her voice steady. "Miles Donovan, you're the grumpiest man I've ever met, but also the most amazing. You gave me a home, a place where I could be myself. I promise to love you no matter how bad your ramen is, and I'll always wear these red shoes to remind us of the day I found you." Laughter filled the clearing, and Rusty barked in approval. The officiant declared them husband and wife, and before anyone could applaud, Miles pulled Zoe into a kiss, deep, full of coffee and lavender and everything they had been through. Zoe kissed him back, arms wrapped around his neck, feeling like the world had melted into just them. When they pulled apart, she teased, "A kiss like that and no greenhouse? You're getting lazy, Donovan." He laughed, wrapping her in another hug. "Wait till tonight. I've got a surprise for you." That evening, after a wedding feast of toast, jam, and awkward dancing under string lights, Zoe and Miles sat by the lake, barefoot on the grass. Rusty lay nearby, snoring softly. Zoe rested her head on Miles's shoulder, watching the moonlight ripple over the water. "This was the best day of my life," she whispered. "Thank you, Miles." He kissed the top of her head, his voice low. "Thank you for not giving up on me." Zoe smiled and pulled a small notebook from her jacket pocket, a journal she'd started the day she returned to the cabin. She opened to a fresh page, the moonlight bright enough to write by. Her pen moved gently across the paper. "I ran away from a life that didn't belong to me, only to find the place I truly belonged, in his arms." She closed the journal and looked at Miles, who was watching her with soft eyes. "What were you writing?" he asked. "Just our story," she said, leaning into him again. "And it's not over yet." Miles smiled, pulling her closer. "Not even close, bride. We've got a whole life to write." They sat there under the moonlight, surrounded by pine trees and the scent of lavender, knowing that whatever the future held, they'd face it together, with love, with red shoes, and with a little cabin deep in the woods they now called home.